Ladies and gentlemen, let's stop pretending. Let's stop calling fear faith. Let's stop calling silence wisdom. And let's definitely stop calling self-betrayal patience. Because for too long you've been told that patience is a virtue, and it is, when it's aligned with purpose. But when it's rooted in fear, in shame, in comfort, it's not patience. That's quiet self-destruction. Some of you are not being patient, you're being passive. You're waiting for permission, waiting for someone to notice you, waiting for the right time, the right words, the right sign from the universe, as if the universe didn't already put the fire in your chest. Let me tell you something real. The world doesn't reward the one who waits the longest. It rewards the one who moves with clarity, with courage, with conviction. You're sitting on gifts. You're sitting on callings. You're sitting on business ideas, books, movements, messages, ministries. And you're saying it's not time yet. But if not now, when? Every day you wait, you teach yourself that your dreams can wait. Every time you delay your own becoming. You're not just being patient, you're shrinking. You're losing pieces of yourself in the name of being polite, humble, and understanding. And let me ask you this. How much longer will you tolerate the things that insult your spirit? How much longer will you excuse people who don't respect you? How much longer will you play small just to make others comfortable? That's not humility, that's hiding. That's not spiritual, that's sabotage. That's not maturity, that's fear. And I'm not here to shame you, I'm here to wake you up. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before you decided to be patient. You were not born to be loyal to your limitations. You were not born to blend in, back down, or beg for your worth to be seen. You were born to build, to disrupt, to take up space. So I dare you, be impatient with your stagnation. Be impatient with environments that dull your brilliance. Be impatient with relationships that drain you. Be impatient with systems that silence you. You don't need more time. You need more truth. So here it is. Your patience is not a crown, it's a cage. And if you're not careful, it will cost you your confidence, your calling, and your clarity. You don't need to wait to be great. You just need to decide you're done waiting. We've been told our whole lives that patience is a virtue, that good things come to those who wait, that if you just hold on long enough, if you keep your head down, do the work quietly, and stay out of the way, eventually life will reward you. But here's the truth we don't talk about enough. Patience is not always a virtue. Sometimes patience is a mask, a disguise we wear to avoid confrontation, risk, or discomfort. Sometimes what we call patience is just fear with better PR. Yes, patience has its place. Timing matters. Discernment matters. But when patience turns into passivity, when it becomes an excuse not to move, not to speak, not to rise, it stops being noble and starts being dangerous. Because while you're patiently waiting for the perfect moment, life is moving, opportunities are moving, people with half your potential and none of your hesitation are moving. You can convince yourself you're being wise, that you're being strategic, that you're being humble, but deep down you know the difference between waiting on alignment and avoiding accountability. You know when your stillness is peace and when it's procrastination dressed up as peace. That inner voice that keeps tugging at you, that restless energy in your gut. It's not random. It's the real you trying to wake you up from the illusion that more waiting will somehow make you more. Let's be honest. The idea that patience alone will deliver your breakthrough is comforting. It lets you off the hook. It tells you that you don't need to be bold or brave or loud. You just have to wait. But transformation doesn't come through waiting. It comes through movement, through decisions, through action, even when it's messy, even when you're not 100% sure. Sometimes patience becomes self-abandonment. You stay in the wrong relationship too long because you're giving it time. You tolerate that job that drains your soul because you're being patient for the right door to open. You keep showing up for people who don't value you because you think patience is the high road. But it's not the high road if it's killing your spirit on the way up. Let's call it what it is. Sometimes we're not being patient. We're being scared. Scared to speak up, scared to leave, scared to start over, scared to be seen trying. So instead we wait. We wait for perfect clarity, for unanimous support, for no risk. And in that waiting, we lose ourselves. We silence our voice. We lower our standards. We train ourselves to expect less, to demand less, to accept delay as destiny. Patience is only a virtue when it serves your growth, when it's rooted in purpose, not fear, when it makes you stronger, not smaller. And if your version of patience is causing you to question your worth, to second-guess your value, to settle for less than you know you deserve, it's not a virtue. It's a slow erosion of your identity. You don't need to rush. But you also don't need to keep pretending that waiting is the answer when action is what's required. You can be both wise and decisive. You can be both discerning and courageous. The goal is not to eliminate patience. The goal is to stop hiding behind it. Because at some point, patience becomes the polite word for fear. And you weren't put here to live a life that's politely wasted. We grow up believing that if we just work hard, stay quiet, and do what's expected of us, we'll be noticed. That if we keep our heads down long enough, someone will eventually recognize our value and offer us the opportunity we've been waiting for. But that's not how the world works. Not really. Because the truth is, the world doesn't reward silence. It rewards clarity. Clarity is magnetic. Clarity is bold. Clarity walks into the room before you even speak. When you know who you are, what you stand for, what you want, and what you will no longer tolerate, the world begins to respond differently to you. It's not that you've changed completely. It's that you've stopped shrinking. You've stopped playing it safe. You've stopped making yourself small so that others feel comfortable. Silence, on the other hand, is often misunderstood. We think staying quiet makes us appear wise, respectful, humble, but many times silence isn't grace, it's fear. It's self-doubt. It's learned helplessness. Silence becomes the language of people who've been taught that asking is too much, that wanting is too loud, that asserting is arrogant. But how can the world give you what you've never asked for? How can you be chosen when you've never even shown up? How can your value be seen if you hide behind politeness and patience, afraid to disrupt the flow? Let's be honest, silence is easy. It doesn't take much to stay quiet. It's safe, it's comfortable. But clarity? Clarity takes courage. Clarity says, this is who I am. Clarity says, this is what I want. Clarity says, this is what I will no longer accept. And that kind of honesty with yourself and with the world, that is what moves things. That is what opens doors. That is what shifts atmospheres. We're often afraid that if we speak up, we'll be judged. If we draw a line, we'll be seen as difficult. If we declare our worth, we'll be called arrogant. But what's the cost of staying silent? How many opportunities have you missed because you didn't ask the question, didn't send the email, didn't apply, didn't demand better? How many times have you swallowed your truth in the name of peace, only to feel more chaotic inside? Clarity doesn't mean being loud. It means being grounded. You don't have to scream to be powerful, but you do have to stand. Stand in your truth, Stand in your boundaries. Stand in your purpose. The world needs less noise, yes, but it also needs fewer people hiding behind politeness and calling it humility. If you're unclear about who you are, the world will decide for you. It will label you, box you in, and define you by what you didn't say. And that's the danger of silence. It allows others to fill in the blanks, and they will fill them in with their assumptions, their projections, their limitations, not your truth. We don't talk enough about what it really costs to delay, to postpone, to hesitate, to keep saying not yet or maybe later. We think we're being careful, strategic, thoughtful, but more often than not, we're betraying ourselves in the process. Because delayed action becomes self-betrayal, slowly, quietly, consistently. Every time you tell yourself, I'll do it when I'm ready, you are making the assumption that readiness is a feeling that will arrive fully formed, that confidence will one day land in your lap and make the risk disappear. But confidence doesn't come before action. It comes as a result of it. It is built through motion. And the longer you wait to act, the more you convince yourself that your dreams require permission, not participation. You betray yourself when you hear your own truth clearly, but choose not to respond to it. You know you're unhappy. You know you've outgrown that situation. You know your potential is being stifled where you are, and yet you wait. You tell yourself, soon, as if soon isn't just code for staying the same a little longer. Let's be honest, most delays aren't about logic, they're about fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being seen trying. But in avoiding failure, you also avoid growth. And while you're trying not to fail, you're quietly failing yourself. When you delay action, you train yourself to tolerate less than what you know you deserve. You stay in the wrong relationship because you're afraid to be alone. You stay in a job that exhausts you because it's safe. You keep pushing your dreams to the side because someone else told you to be realistic. And every time you ignore that nudge inside, that quiet pull towards something greater, a small part of you gets quieter too. That's what betrayal looks like. Not dramatic, just slow and consistent erosion of trust in yourself. You stop believing in your ideas not because they aren't good, but because you've waited so long to act on them that you've convinced yourself they weren't worth it. You start doubting your voice because it's been silenced for so long, not by others, but by you, by the delay, by the hesitation, by the fear you keep dressing up as patience or wisdom. Let's be clear, self-betrayal doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like routine. It looks like doing what you've always done because it's familiar, even though it no longer fits. It looks like avoiding the discomfort of growth by settling for the comfort of stagnation. It looks like calling it God's timing when deep down you know it's just your unwillingness to take the first step. Growth requires risk. It requires boldness, and sometimes it requires moving before everything makes perfect sense. You don't owe the world a perfect version of yourself. You owe yourself the chance to evolve, to rise, to stretch beyond what's safe. You owe yourself the chance to see who you become when you finally stop postponing your power. So no, this isn't about rushing. It's not about acting without thought. It's about recognizing that delay, when rooted in fear, is just another form of rejection. And this time, you're the one doing the rejecting of your own dreams, of your own potential, of your own voice. The question isn't, are you ready? It's, are you willing? Because if you keep waiting until you're sure, until it's easy, until it's perfect, you'll never begin. And that, right there, is how you slowly betray everything you were born to be. We love to call ourselves patient. It sounds noble, it sounds mature, it sounds spiritual, and sometimes it truly is. But more often than we're willing to admit, patience is just a convenient excuse for inaction, a shield we hide behind when we're afraid to move, afraid to try, afraid to fail. We say we're waiting for the right time. We say we're trusting the process. We say we're not in a rush. But deep down, we know the truth. We're stalling. We're hesitating. We're convincing ourselves that stillness is strategy when it's really just fear. There's a difference between patience that grows you and patience that protects your comfort zone. One is rooted in faith, the other is rooted in fear. One expands you, the other keeps you stuck, and it's easy to blur the line. It's easy to dress up your fear as patience and call it wisdom, especially when the people around you applaud your maturity for not taking risks. But you have to be honest with yourself. You're not being patient. You're playing small. You're using the language of timing to justify why you haven't taken the first step, why you haven't started that business, why you haven't left that relationship, why you haven't written the book, made the call, asked the question. It's not timing, it's hesitation. And the longer you let it linger, the more it becomes your habit. You begin to believe your own excuse. You start calling it peace when really it's avoidance. You say you're surrendering when really you're shrinking. You tell yourself that you're letting things unfold when really you're too afraid to pick up the pen and write the next chapter yourself. You weren't born to stand on the sidelines of your own life. You weren't designed to wait endlessly for a sign while your soul is screaming for movement. And yet, so many of us stay stuck in maybe later for years, sometimes decades, because we don't want to confront what it really takes to evolve: decision, action, discomfort. Growth is uncomfortable. Change is risky. Action demands something of you. But so does inaction. It quietly takes from you every day. Your confidence, your clarity, your self-trust. It teaches you to doubt your instincts. It convinces you that you can't move until everything is perfect, when in reality, perfection is just another delay tactic. We keep waiting for a breakthrough without realizing we're the ones holding the door shut. We say we're waiting on God, the universe, the market, the right moment, but really, we're waiting on ourselves to get brave enough to start. And that's a truth that hurts because it forces us to take responsibility. Patience becomes dangerous when it gives us a false sense of progress. We feel like we're doing something because we're thinking about it, planning, visualizing, talking ourselves in circles, but there's no real movement, no commitment, no risk, just cycles of delay wrapped in the illusion of preparation. There is a time to wait, yes, but there is also a time to move. Even if you're scared, even if you're unsure, even if the path isn't fully visible yet. The people who change their lives are not the ones who waited the longest. They're the ones who got tired of waiting for permission and decided to act. So stop calling your fear patience. Stop pretending your delay is divine when it's really just doubt. You don't need more time, you need more courage. You don't need more signs, you need more self-belief. Patience is a gift when it's used with wisdom, but when it becomes your go-to excuse to avoid action, it's not a virtue, it's a prison. And only you hold the key. There's a story we like to tell ourselves, that we're just being humble, that we don't want too much attention, that we're okay with staying behind the scenes, working quietly, not making a fuss. We say we're not trying to outshine anyone. We just want to do the work, keep our heads down, and let things unfold naturally. But here's the truth you may not want to hear. You're not being humble. You're hiding. There's a difference between humility and invisibility. Humility is knowing your value and choosing to stay grounded in it. Hiding is pretending you don't have value so no one expects anything from you. And too many people confuse the two. We confuse fear with humility. We confuse shrinking with modesty. We confuse silence with grace. But real humility isn't about making yourself small. It's about standing in your power without arrogance. It's about knowing who you are and not needing to prove it to anyone, but not apologizing for it either. Hiding, on the other hand, is what you do when you're afraid of being seen. When you're afraid that standing up, speaking out, or showing up fully will bring judgment, criticism, or expectations you're not ready to meet. So instead, you dim your light, you downplay your gifts, you pretend you're not ready, not qualified, not capable, even when you are. You say things like, I don't need the spotlight, or I'm just here to support, or I'm not the type to put myself out there, but deep down, you're protecting yourself, not from failure, but from visibility. And that kind of hiding becomes a habit. You get good at disappearing, at minimizing your wins, at talking yourself out of opportunities. You stop sharing your ideas, even when they're brilliant. You stop applying, even when you're qualified. You stop raising your hand, even when your voice could make a difference. You do all of this in the name of humility, but it's not humility. It's fear dressed in respectability. Let's tell the truth. Sometimes we stay small because it's easier. There's less pressure in the shadows, less risk, less vulnerability. But there's also less growth, less impact, less fulfillment, because you can't be who you were born to be and still insist on staying hidden. You can't change lives, build legacies, or make history while pretending you're just average. You weren't given your voice, your ideas, your perspective, your presence just to keep them locked away. You were given them to be used, to serve, to inspire, to lead. And no, that doesn't mean you have to be loud or performative, but it does mean you have to show up fully, authentically, courageously. So if you've been calling your hiding place humility, it's time to call it what it is, self-protection. It's time to be honest about what you're afraid of, and it's time to move anyway. You're not helping anyone by staying small. You're not serving the world by pretending you're not ready. You're not being kind by keeping your brilliance to yourself. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be less. The world needs people who are brave enough to stand in the fullness of who they are, without apology, without fear, and without the need to justify their presence. There's nothing holy about hiding. There's nothing honorable about disappearing. You can be humble and still take up space. You can be grounded and still be bold. You can be kind and still be powerful. So stop calling it humility when it's really just hiding. Stop hiding who you are to protect people who were never threatened, only challenged by your light. You weren't meant to disappear. You were meant to rise. We're taught to be tolerant, to keep the peace, to be the bigger person, to let things slide. We're taught that tolerance is maturity, that it's a sign of strength, to just deal with it, to smile through discomfort, to nod through disrespect, to stay silent when everything in us wants to speak. But there's a line that rarely gets acknowledged, and too many of us have crossed it without realizing. Your tolerance is costing you your identity. Tolerance sounds noble, but it becomes dangerous when it turns into self-abandonment. When you keep allowing what breaks your spirit, what drains your energy, what dishonors your values, all in the name of being understanding. At some point, tolerance stops being a virtue and starts being a slow surrender. Not to others, but to a version of you that's smaller, quieter, and safer than you were ever meant to be. Every time you tolerate something that goes against your truth, you chip away at your sense of self. You train yourself to adapt when you should be setting boundaries. You get comfortable swallowing your voice because you're afraid of being seen as difficult. You stay in rooms where you no longer belong, in relationships that stunt your growth, in environments that don't reflect your worth, and you tell yourself you're being patient, when in reality, you're disappearing. It starts small. You let the comments slide. You ignore the red flag. You laugh off the disrespect. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, or maybe I'm being too sensitive. And over time, those little moments of dismissal turn into habits of self-denial. You forget what you actually believe. You forget what you actually want. You start living for comfort and conflict avoidance, not alignment. And here's the truth. What you tolerate becomes your standard, not just in how others treat you, but in how you treat yourself. If you consistently allow people to cross your boundaries, your subconscious starts to believe that boundaries don't matter. If you keep showing up in spaces where you feel unseen or undervalued, you begin to believe that being overlooked is normal, that it's what you deserve. Tolerance becomes dangerous when it conditions you to forget yourself, when it teaches you to trade authenticity for acceptance, when it convinces you that staying quiet keeps you safe, when in reality it's keeping you stuck. Your identity was never meant to be built on avoidance. It was meant to be rooted in clarity, in knowing who you are, what you value, and what you refuse to compromise. This isn't about being harsh or rigid. It's not about rejecting everyone who challenges you. It's about knowing the difference between healthy compromise and silent self-erasure. You can be kind without being passive. You can be compassionate without being a doormat. You can be understanding without being unrecognizable to yourself. You weren't meant to tolerate everything. You weren't meant to accept whatever's given. You weren't meant to survive on crumbs and call it peace. You were meant to take up space, to set standards, to draw lines that protect your purpose, not limit it. If your tolerance is costing you your sense of peace, your confidence, your voice, your joy, it's too expensive. If it's forcing you to perform instead of live fully, it's not worth it. And if it's requiring you to shrink so others can feel comfortable, then it's not tolerance. It's abandonment. You don't owe anyone a watered-down version of yourself. You owe yourself truth. You owe yourself alignment. You owe yourself a life where you don't have to constantly tolerate what depletes you in order to belong. Because if you have to lose yourself to keep something or someone that was never yours to begin with, there is a version of you that exists beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond the stories you've been told about what you can and cannot do. And yet, so many people never meet that version of themselves, not because it's out of reach, but because they've become loyal to their limitations. They've built identities around what's realistic, what's safe, what's normal, and never stopped to question where those definitions came from. But you were not born to be loyal to your limitations. Somewhere along the way, you decided what was possible for you. Or maybe someone else decided for you, a parent, a teacher, a boss, society, and you believed them. You believed them when they said you were too quiet, too loud, too emotional, too different. You believed them when they told you success was for other people, that leadership wasn't for people like you, that your dreams were too big, or too late, or too much. So you made yourself small. You adjusted. You folded yourself to fit into boxes you were never meant to live in. You set goals not based on your potential, but on your pain, on your past, on your fear of failing. And now you don't even call it fear anymore. You call it being realistic. You call it knowing your limits. You call it being practical. But deep down, you know better. You know you're capable of more. You feel it every time you see someone else doing what you wish you had the courage to try. Let's be honest. Limitations can be comfortable. They can feel safe. They can protect you from the vulnerability of trying and not succeeding. But they also trap you. They keep you living the same year over and over, calling it a life. They keep you stuck in loops of maybe someday, and I'm not ready yet, while time passes and your potential goes untouched. Loyalty is powerful, but misplaced loyalty is dangerous. And when you give your loyalty to your limitations, you betray your gifts. You betray your calling. You betray the version of you that was born to break cycles, to build something new, to lead in ways no one around you ever has. You don't owe your past that kind of loyalty. You don't owe your fears that kind of commitment. You don't have to keep honoring the boundaries that someone else built around your life. You were born with purpose, with creativity, with vision. You were born to stretch, to evolve, to expand. And yes, that will require discomfort. Yes, it will challenge the lies you've believed about yourself. Yes, it will force you to leave behind the safety of what's familiar. But isn't that worth it if it means reclaiming your identity? Isn't that worth it if it means stepping into the fullness of who you really are? You do not need to have everything figured out to move. You do not need to have all the answers to begin. You just need to be willing to stop serving the narrative that keeps you small. You need to stop bowing to limits that were never yours in the first place. There is no medal for living a life that fits other people's expectations. There is no reward for staying silent about your dreams. You don't get extra credit for hiding your brilliance so others won't feel uncomfortable. And you don't need to apologize for wanting more, for wanting better. So, no, you weren't born to be loyal to your limitations. You were born to break them, to question them, to rise above them, to outgrow them again and again. Because every time you do, you get closer to the life you were meant to live. Not the one fear told you to settle for, but the one faith dares you to reach for.